will know, I mean, that has its roots in a graphic novel. And you talked before about storyboarding and what you said about, you know, controlling where the audience looks with a close-up of the eye, but very specifically orchestrated shots. Did it influence the style of it that it came from a graphic novel, or was it your relationship with your DP? How did the style that we see on screen there come about?
To be honest with you, it was influenced much more by, you know, Sergio Leone and Once Upon a Time in America and the sort of gangster movies that I'd seen as a kid. Obviously, The Godfather, but also, you know, other movies of that period. But definitely Leone than it was by the graphic novel. The graphic novel is drawn much more like a kind of John Woo movie. You know, it's much more, you know, biff bang pow, and it's much more actiony. And I wanted something that was, you know, that was more manga than it was graphic novel. You know, I mean, it was something sort of Japanese, almost, you know, really clean lines about it. I've got to tell you, sorry, I was laughing during watching that because all I remember is on the day that we shot that, or days, nights, endless nights, Conrad Hall, when Tom Hanks has to run out of the warehouse and see the boy. You know, Conrad was very old, and he's 75 at that stage, and a genius, but he would always forget that he had his earphones, his cans on. So he would shout. He would sit next to me in his chair, and he would shout because, you know, like an old person with an iPod on. You know what I mean? He didn't know that you know. And as Tom ran out, he was facing the monitor screen like this, Conrad, and Tom was right next to him, but he thought something. He hadn't worked out that Tom was right there. He said, "Jesus Christ, Tom Hanks runs like a fucking duck." And Tom standing right next to him. He said, "Thank you very much." And whenever I see that, I always think of Tom running like a duck. Anyway,
But you described it. I mean, it's interesting. We talk about in film and theatre. That you said that actually you think the underlying thing, it's operatic, it's opera, isn't it? That in visually it's opera.
Yeah, this is definitely was that. I mean, I look, you know, the reality was, you know, American Beauty was a huge success. I thought I'm going to make the sort of big, you know, American, you know, a sort of fantasy movie in a way, you know, you know, maybe I've got one chance to make a huge, great, you know, $100 million movie, you know, with enormous movie stars, and I'd always wanted to. You know, I was a huge Paul Newman fan, obviously, you know, who isn't, and I couldn't believe it that he actually said yes to the movie. So it was kind of a fantasy in a way, but it was conceived as, you know, it hovers, you know, a couple of foot above the ground. It's not a real, you know, it's opera, you know, and I felt I was very dependent in that on also Tom Newman, who was a crucial component in all my movies until Away We Go. Certainly in the last two clips you've seen, you know, the music.
Now, I'm going to show one more clip because I'm aware that I want to have half an hour for the audience to ask their questions. We're going to show a clip from Jarhead. It's interesting. My belief is that you've had final cut on all your films. That's right, isn't it?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. But you have said, in terms of Jarhead, that maybe you were rushing towards a deadline, that if you had more time, the film would have been slightly different.
Yeah.
How would the film have been different if you had that space?
I definitely, I've never been in a situation where I had you know, we set a release date that was, I thought, very realistic, but as it approached, it became less and less realistic because the oil fires and the effects at the end of the movie were hugely difficult to achieve in a way that was naturalistic. You know, it was still, it was only 4 years ago now, but it feels like the early days of CG images in the sense that, you know, there was a time when CG images, everything was crisp and in focus, even in the background. I was trying to get everything out of focus, getting a documentary feel to it. And it was all handheld, so nothing was static. It was very, very difficult, time consuming. And as a consequence, it took me a long, long time to get it visually right. And I sort of lost myself in the details of the movie and forgot the overall shape. To the degree that, at the premiere of the movie, I was sat there watching the movie and about 2/3 of the way through, I thought, Jesus Christ, they've jumped a scene. You know, we've jumped a scene. What's happened? Someone's cut a scene out. And I thought, no, I cut the scene out. I'd just forgotten that I'd cut it out. Well, that should not happen to you after 2 years working on a movie. You make those big decisions late in the day. But I mean, I'm afraid it's more often than not these days it's the case that filmmakers do have to rush right at the end to hit release dates for big movies. But I felt that it was a movie designed to house a lot of voiceover, and a lot of the politics in the movie came from, and the tone of the movie came from a mixture of voiceover which dealt with the politics and projected the movie into the future and made sense of why we were making, during the Second Gulf War, a movie about the First Gulf War. And I felt I didn't make that clear. And secondly, there were a lot of fantasy sequences, which you can see on the DVDs, deleted scenes, which I thought I should have worked harder to get into the movie. It gave it a weird, slightly surreal flavour that I'd taken out. And I think that if I had my chance again, I would do another cut of the movie, and I would change it quite considerably.
This is interesting because you said that the two times that you enjoy the most are the rehearsal period in theatre and the editing period in film. It sounds to me like the one occasion on which the editing period, which the joy of the editing period was perhaps slightly robbed from you.
Well, I loved it, but partly because it was edited by the great Walter Murch, you know, who those of you who don't know, worked on movies like Goldfarb and Conversation and The English Patient, and was one of the great editors of the world, and was written a fantastic book about editing. And but I also felt I was a little bit too respectful of Walter, and I didn't hit the film hard enough myself. I didn't really articulate what I believed the movie should be. I was in awe of his wisdom, you know. So there was a little bit of that as well. But I loved working with him, don't get me wrong, but we just didn't have the time, I think.
Okay, let's have a look at the question from Jahid, and then we'll throw it open to the audience for questions.